He had 100 arms that broke into 100,000 fingers, and all of his fingers reached up into the sky. The weight of the sky was heavy on his shoulders. It was not that the discomfort was lessened, but the pain belonged to the figure hanging from the tree, rather than to the tree itself. Shadow in his madness was now so much more than the man on the tree. It was the tree, he was the tree, and was the wind rattling the bare branches of the world tree. He was the gray sky and the tumbling clouds. He was Ratatosk, the squirrel running from the deepest roots to the highest branches. He was the mad-eyed hawk who sat on a broken branch at the top of these trees surveying the world. He was the worm in the heart of the tree. The stars wheeled and he passed his 100 hands over the glittering stars, palming them, switching them, vanishing them. A moment of clarity. In the pain and the madness, Shadow felt himself surfacing. He knew it would not be for long. The morning sun was dazzling him. He closed his eyes, wishing he could shade them. There was not long to go. He knew that too. When he opened his eyes, Shadow saw that there was a young man in the tree with him. His skin was dark, his forehead was high, and his dark hair was tightly curled. He was sitting on a branch high above Shadow's head. Shadow could see him clearly by craning his head, and the man was mad. Shadow could see that at a glance. "You're naked," confided the madman in a cracked voice. "I'm naked too." "I see that," croaked Shadow. The madman looked at him when he kneaded and twisted his head down and around as if he were trying to remove a crick from his neck. Eventually he said, "Do you know me?" "No," said Shadow. "I know you. I watched you in Cairo. I watched you after. My sister likes you." "You are." The name escaped him. "Eats roadkill." "Yes. You are Horus." The madman nodded. "Horus," he said, "I am the falcon of the morning, the hawk of the afternoon. I am the sun, and you are, as you are. I know the true name of Ra. My mother told me." "That's great," said Shadow politely. The madman stared at the ground below them intently, saying nothing. Then he dropped from the tree. A hawk fell like a stone to the ground, pulled out of its plummet into a swoop, but it beat its wings heavily, flew back to the tree. A baby rabbit in its talons, it landed on a branch closer to Shadow. "Are you hungry?" asked the madman. "No," said Shadow. "I guess I should be, but I'm not." "I'm hungry," said the madman. He ate the rabbit rapidly, pulling it apart, sucking, tearing, rending. As he finished with them, he dropped the gnawed bones and the fur to the ground. He walked farther down the branch until he was only an arm's length from Shadow. Then he peered at Shadow unselfconsciously, inspecting him with care and caution. From his feet to his head, there was rabbit blood on his chin and his chest, and he wiped it off with the back of his hand. Shadow felt he had to say something. "Hey," he said. "Hey," said the madman. He stood up on the branch, turned away from Shadow, and let a stream of dark urine arc out onto the meadow below. It went for a long time. When he had finished, he crouched down again on the branch. "What do they call you?" said Horus. "Shadow," said Shadow. The madman nodded. "You are the Shadow." "I am the light," he said. "Everything that is casts a shadow." Then he said, "They will fight soon. I was watching them as they started to arrive." And then the madman said, "You are dying, aren't you?" But Shadow could no longer speak. A hawk took wing and circled slowly upward, riding the updrafts into the morning. Moonlight. A cough took Shadow's frame, a racking, painful cough that stabbed his chest and his throat. He gagged for breath. "Hey, puppy!" called a voice that he knew. He looked down. The moonlight burned whitely through the branches of the tree, bright as day, and there was a woman standing in the moonlight. On the ground below him, her face a pale oval. The wind rattled in the branches of the tree. "Hi, puppy," she said. He tried to speak, but he coughed instead, deep in his chest for a long time. "You know," she said helpfully, "that doesn't sound good." He croaked, "Hello, Laura." She looked up at him with dead eyes, and she smiled. "How did you find me?" he asked. She was silent for a while in the moonlight. Then she said, "You are the nearest thing I have to life." You're the only thing I have left. The only thing that isn't bleak and flat and gray. I could be blindfolded and dropped into the deepest ocean. I would know where to find you. I could be buried 100 miles underground and I would know where you are. He looked down at the woman in the moonlight and his eyes stung with tears. I'll cut you down, she said, after a while. I spend too much time rescuing you, don't I? He coughed again, then, no, you leave me. I have to do this. She looked up at him and shook her head. You're crazy, she said. You're dying up there, and you'll be crippled if you aren't already. Maybe, he said, but I'm alive. Yes, she said, after a while. After a moment, I guess you are. You told me, he said, in the graveyard. Seems like such a long time ago, puppy, she said. Then she said, I feel better here. It doesn't hurt as much. You know what I mean? But I'm so dry. The wind let up and he could smell her now, a stink of rotten meat and sickness and decay, pervasive and unpleasant. I lost my job, she said. It was a night job, but they said people had complained. I told them I was sick and they said they didn't care. I'm so thirsty. The women, he told her, they have water, the house. Puppy, she sounded scared. Tell them I said to give you water. The white face stared up at him. I should go. She told him. Then she hacked and made a face and spat a mass of something white onto the grass. It broke up when it hit the ground and wriggled away. It was almost impossible to breathe. His chest felt heavy and his head was swaying. Stay, he said, in a breath that was almost a whisper, unsure whether or not she could hear him. Please don't go. He started to cough. Stay the night. I'll stop a while, she said, and then, like a mother to a child, she said, nothing's gonna hurt you when I'm here. You know that? Shadow coughed once more. He closed his eyes. Only for a moment, he thought, but when he opened them again, the moon had set, and he was alone. A crashing and a pounding in his head, beyond the pain of migraine, beyond all pain. Everything dissolved into tiny butterflies, which circled him like a multicolored dust storm and then evaporated into the night. The white sheet wrapped about the body at the base of the tree flapped noisily in the morning wind. The pounding eased, everything slowed. There was nothing left to make him keep breathing. His heart ceased to beat in his chest. The darkness that he entered this time was deep and lit by a single star, and it was final. I know it's crooked, but it's the only game in town. Canada Bill Jones. The tree was gone, and the morning gray sky above him was gone. The sky was now the color of midnight. There was a single cold star shining high above him, a blazing, twinkling light and nothing else. He took a single step and almost tripped. Shadow looked down. There were steps cut into the rock going down, steps so huge that he could only imagine that giants had cut them and descended them a long time ago. He clambered downward, half jumping, half vaulting from step to step. His body ached, but it was the ache of lack of use, not the tortured ache of a body that is hung on a tree until it was dead. He observed, without surprise, that he was now fully dressed in jeans and a white t-shirt. He was barefoot. He experienced a profound moment of deja vu. This was what he had been wearing when he stood on Zernabog's apartment, the night when Zoria Polichnaya had come to him and told him about the constellation called Odin's Wain. She had taken the moon down from the sky for him. He knew suddenly what would happen next. Zoria Polichnaya would be there. She was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. There was no room in the sky, but she was bathed in moonlight. Nonetheless, Her white hair was moon pale, and she wore the same lace and cotton nightdress she had worn that night in Chicago. She smiled when she saw him and looked down as if momentarily embarrassed. "Hello," she said. "Hi," said Shadow. "How are you?" "I don't know," he said. "I think this is maybe another strange dream on the tree. I've been having crazy dreams since I got out of prison." Her face was silvered by the moonlight, but no moon hung in that plum-black sky, and now at the foot of the steps, even the single star was lost to view, and she looked both solemn and vulnerable. She said, "All your questions can be answered if that is what you want, but once you learn your answers, you can never unlearn them." Beyond her, the path forked. He would have to decide which path to take. He knew that, for there was one thing he had to do first. He reached into the pocket of his jeans, was relieved when he felt that familiar weight of the coin at the bottom of the pocket. He eased it out, held it between finger and thumb. "A 1922 Liberty dollar. This is yours," he said. He remembered then that his clothes were really at the foot of the tree. The women had placed his clothes in the canvas sack from which they had taken the ropes and tied the end of the sack, and the biggest of the women had placed a heavy rock on it to stop it from blowing away. And he knew that, in reality, the Liberty dollar was in a pocket in that sack beneath the rock, but still it was heavy in his hand in the entrance to the underworld. She took it from his palm with her slim fingers. "Thank you. It bought you your liberty twice," she said, "and now it will light your way into the dark places." She closed her hand around the dollar, then she reached up and placed it in the air as high as she could reach, then let go of it. Instead of falling, the coin floated upward until it was a foot or so above Shadow's head. It was no longer a silver coin, though. Lady Liberty had her crown of spikes were gone. The face he saw in the coin was the indeterminate face of the moon in the summer sky. Shadow could not decide whether he was looking at a moon the size of a dollar, a foot above his head, or whether he was looking at a moon the size of the Pacific Ocean, many thousands of miles away, nor whether there was any difference between the two ideas. Perhaps it was all a matter of the way you looked at it. He looked at the forking path ahead of him. "Which path should I take?" he asked. "Which one is safe?" "Take one and you cannot take the other," she said, "but neither path is safe. Which way would you walk, the way of hard truths or the way of the fine lies?" "The truths," he said. "I've come too far for more lies." She looked sad. "There will be a price then," she said. "I'll pay it. What's the price?" "Your name," she said. "Your real name. You will have to give it to me." "How?" "Like this," she said. She reached a perfect hand toward his head. He felt her fingers brush his skin, then he felt them penetrate his skin, his skull, felt them push deep into his head. Something tickled in his skull and all down his spine. She pulled her hand out of his head, a flame, like a candle flame, but burning with clear magnesium white luminance, was flickering on the tip of her forefinger. "Is that my name?" he asked. She closed her hand and the light was gone. "It was," she said. She extended her hand and pointed to the right-hand path. "That way," she said, "for now." Nameless, Shadow walked down the right-hand path in the moonlight. When he turned around to thank her, he saw nothing but darkness. It seemed to him that he was deep under the ground, but when he looked up into the darkness above him, he still saw the tiny moon. He turned a corner. If this was the afterlife, he thought, it was a lot like the house on the rock, part diorama, part nightmare. He was looking at himself in prison blues in the warden's office. As the warden told him that Laura had died in a car crash, he saw the expression on his own face. He looked like a man who had been abandoned by the world. It hurt him to see it. The nakedness. The nakedness and the fear. He hurried on, pushed through the warden's gray office, and found himself looking at the VCR repair stone on the outskirts of Eagle Point. 3 years ago, yes. Inside the store, he knew he was beating the living crap out of Larry Powers and B.J. West, bruising his knuckles in the process. Pretty soon he would walk out of there carrying a brown supermarket bag filled with $20 bills. the money. They could never prove he had taken his share of the proceeds and a little more, for they shouldn't have tried to rip him and Laura off like that. He was only the driver, but he had done his part, done everything that he had asked of him. At the trial, nobody mentioned the bank robbery, although everybody wanted to. They couldn't prove a thing as long as nobody was talking, and nobody was. The prosecutor was forced inside to stick to the bodily damage that Shadow had inflicted on Powers and West. He showed photographs of the two men on their arrival in the local hospital. Shadow barely defended himself in court. It was easier that way. Neither Powers nor West seemed able to remember what the fight had been about, but they each admitted that Shadow had been their assailant. Nobody talked about the money. Nobody ever mentioned Laura. And that was all that Shadow had wanted. Shadow wondered whether the path of comforting lies would have been a better one to walk. He walked away from that place and followed the rock path down into what looked like a hospital room. A public hospital in Chicago, and he felt the bile rise in his throat. He stopped. He did not want to look. He did not want to keep walking. In the hospital bed, his mother was dying again, as she died when he was 16, and yes, here he was, a large, clumsy 16-year-old with acne, pocking his cream and coffee skin, sitting at her bedside, unable to look at her, reading a thick paperback book. Shadow wondered what the book was, and he walked around the hospital bed to inspect it more closely. He stood between the bed and the chair, looking from one to the other. The big boy hunched into his chair, his nose buried in gravity's rainbow, trying to escape from his mother's death into the London during the Blitz. The fictional madness of the book, no escape and no excuse. His mother's eyes were closed in a morphine peace. What she had thought was just another sickle cell crisis, another bout of pain to be endured, had turned out they had discovered too late to be lymphoma. There was a lemonish gray tinge to her skin. She was in her early 30s, but she looked much older. Shadow wanted to shake himself. The awkward boy that he once was, get him to hold her hand, talk to her, do something before she slipped away, as he knew that she would. But he could not touch himself, and he continued to read, and so his mother died while he sat in the chair next to her, reading a fat book. After that, he had more or less stopped reading. You could not trust fiction. What good were books if they couldn't protect you from something like that? Shadow walked away from the hospital room, down the winding corridor, deep into the bowels of the earth. He sees his mother first, and he cannot believe how young she is, and not yet 25, he guesses. Before her medical discharge, they're in their apartment, another embassy rental somewhere in Northern Europe. He looks around for something to give him a clue, and he sees himself, a shrimp of a kid, big, pale, gray eyes and dark hair. They are arguing. Shadow knows without hearing the words what they're arguing about. It was the only thing they quarreled about after all. Tell me about my father. He's dead. Don't ask about him. But who was he? Forget him. Dead and gone, and you ain't missed nothing. I want to see a picture of him. I ain't got a picture, she'd say. And her voice would get quiet and fierce, and he knew that if he kept asking her questions, she would shout or even hit him, and he knew that he would not stop asking questions, so he turned away and walked on down the tunnel. The path he followed twisted and wound and curled back on itself, and it put him in mind of snake skins and intestines and of deep, deep tree roots. There was a pool to his left. He heard the drip, drip of water into it somewhere at the back of the tunnel, the falling water barely ruffling the mirrored surface of the pool. He dropped to his knees and drank, using his hand to bring the waters to his lips. Then he walked on until he was standing in the floating disco glitter patterns of a mirror ball. It was like being in the exact center of the universe with all the stars and planets circling him, and he could not hear anything, not the music, nor the shouted conversations over the music. And now Shadow was staring at a woman who looked just like his mother, never looked in all the years he knew her. She's little more than a child, after all. And she is dancing. Shadow found that he was completely unsurprised when he recognized the man who dances with her. He had not changed that much in 33 years. She is drunk. Shadow could see that at a glance. She is not very drunk, but she is unused to drink. And in a week or so, she will take a ship to Norway. They have been drinking margaritas, and she has salt on her lips and salt clinging to the back of her hand. Wednesday is not wearing a suit and tie, but the pin in the shape of a silver tree he wears over the pocket of his shirt glitters and glints when the mirror ball light catches it. They make a fine-looking couple, considering the difference in their ages. There's a lupine grace to Wednesday's movements, a slow dance. He pulls her close to him, and his paw-like hand curves around the seat of her skirt possessively, moving her closer to him. His other hand takes her chin, pushes it upward into his face, and the two of them kiss. They're on the floor, as the glitter ball lights circle them into the center of the universe soon after they leave. She sways against him, and he leads her from the dance hall. Shadow buried his head in his hands and did not follow them, unable to or unwilling to witness his own conception. The mirror lights were gone, and now the only illumination came from the tiny room that burned high above his head. He walked on. At a bend in the path, he stopped for a moment to catch his breath. He felt a hand run gently up his back, and gentle fingers ruffle the hair on the back of his head. "Hello?" whispered a smoky, feline voice. Over his shoulder, "Hello?" he said, turning to face her. She had brown hair and brown skin, and her eyes were the deep golden amber of golden honey. Her pupils were vertical slits. "Do I know you?" he asked, puzzled. "Intimately," she said, and she smiled. I used to sleep on your bed, and my people have been keeping their eyes on you for me." She turned to the path ahead of him, pointed to the 3 ways he could go. "Okay," she said. "One way will make you wise, one way will make you whole, and one way will kill you." "I'm already dead, I think," said Shadow. "I died on the tree." She made a mew. There's dead," she said. "And there's dead, and there's dead. It's a relative thing." Then she smiled again. "I could make a joke about that, you know. Something about dead relatives." "No," said Shadow. "It's okay." "No," she said. "Which way do you want to go?" "I don't know," he admitted. She tipped her head on one side, a perfectly feline gesture. Suddenly, Shadow remembered the claw marks on his shoulder. He felt himself beginning to blush. "If you trust me," said Bast, "I can choose for you." "I trust you," he said, without hesitation. "Do you want to know what it's going to cost you?" "I've already lost my name," he told her. "Names come and names go. Was it worth it?" "Yes, maybe. It wasn't easy. As revelations go, it was kind of personal." "All revelations are personal," she said. "That's why all revelations are suspect." "I don't understand." "No," she said, "you don't. I'll take your heart. We'll need it later." And she reached her hand deep inside his chest, and she pulled it out, and something ruby and pulsing held between her sharp fingernails. It was the color of pigeon's blood, and it was made of pure light. Rhythmically, it expanded and contracted.